So I've structured this webinar into 3 parts, where I want first to talk about principles, just to make sure we have a similar ground, and I will relate in these principles the different major paradigms, which is blend-driven development, agile development, and lean development, and show the typical application, the value, and the risks. I will then look in a second part into what I call performance, that is providing some industry benchmarks and also concrete guidance with a couple of experiences, such as how to work with value stream analysis, how to reduce waste in some cases, just to have some hands-on experiences. And finally, in a third part, I want to show from a real example how an introduction of lean looks like, and what are the experiences which we have made with managing such changes. And I think this quote of Jim Highsmith, which I have here, is already a good starting point, because it underlines that despite all the necessity to have some rules and some process which nobody really questions, independent whether it's agile, lean, or any other development paradigm, it's important to not overdo, to not have overly complex rules. So the logic here is that simple rules will have the stimulus to people to think. If processes, if rules, if environments are overly complex, and that holds as well for code as architecture, as process, it will lead to stupid behavior of just following and not anymore thinking whether it's applicable or not. And that's something to keep in mind here. If we look to industriality, and I just have here a few quotes of some journals, what we realize is that we see a lot of challenges in different sectors, like the upper left, which is from automotive. 80% of electronic control unit development overrun their budget. On the other side, we also see that there's a lot of push, like the IT Weekly in the middle, which is there's a price reduction, double-digit per year, which is independent whether we talk here about ICT or automotive. I know it from a lot of different industry domains. There's also levers, such as how to reduce cycle time, how to use variant management, how to control complexity. All that is happening on a day-to-day basis, and what we try to show here is what kind of success factors there are, and what can we learn from these different endeavors. I would start with blend-driven development as a baseline, because that's something which probably all of us had been exposed one way or the other. It's a development with focus on systematic analysis, planning and execution, typically with a clearly defined life cycle. And also here I want to underline that the concept of life cycle is not really abandoned if a company would work in agile or lean. I'm, for instance, working with a big healthcare supplier, and they are forced from FDA to have a very clear life cycle instrumented with a lot of quality gates. Nevertheless, they are able to work both with lean concepts on the product development and product definition, and also with lean, with agile concepts in the entire development, like Scrum. In other words, life cycle per se is not blend-driven. Rather, blend-driven makes use of life cycle, makes use of milestones, but is primarily that tasks are planned to a high degree upfront, and often this is because of legislative obligations, governance principles which have been followed, and specifically where you have complex ventures with different suppliers, with different stakeholders of different companies, it's helpful to have such a skeleton. Blend-driven still is the most widely used paradigm. The drawback is what we all are aware of. It's over too much formalism, it's too much administration, and often the rework cycles are quite extensive. So this is why other paradigms had been created, such as Agile, which had recently celebrated already a double-digit birthday. So this is something where we already have drawn a lot of experience over the past 15 years. And the major difference to plan-driven is that here is a strong focus on flexibility, on trust, on people, reduce overheads as much as possible. And this flexibility, this very lightweight control and process scheme, this is what will help in practice, but on the other side also creates certain risks, such as if there is big distributed organizations. For instance, I've been working with a couple of companies which are active in different continents, and while I very much emphasize Scrum in such setting, it needs huge discipline in order to get things done, and actually Scrum facilitates even distributed development. But I face much more companies which struggle on their way rather than who succeed, because evidently this everybody in one room approach with almost no documentation, a lot of things which are shared in the coffee corner, this will not work once it is distributed. Also, a couple of the principles, like a customer on the project, like a continuous refactoring, this is not what is always feasible. So what I recommend in such cases to apply the principles, but very much also question and tailor these principles to the concrete setting. And this is actually what is also the quote of Jim Highsmith. Now, lean development, in a way, is the most recent in this list of three paradigms. It's not really young from an industry perspective. Lean manufacturing is, in fact, a quite old principle in order to reduce waste, to focus on what is at the moment the most important task. But it took a while until these principles had been distilled and then made applicable to development. And its key principle is end-to-end focus, to understand and deliver to customer needs, to minimize rework, to have very efficient work streams, empower teams, and continuous improvement. Now, one can argue this is in line with Agile, and in fact there's a couple of overlaps in these principles. A major difference is that Lean takes much more this end-to-end focus than many of the Agile paradigms, which look much more on specific things like Scrum and project management, or extreme programming related to implementation, feature-driven development related to increment planning. Lean is in a way a little bit more generalizing and trying to take the product focus. The effects is pretty much in line with what we heard. It's more customer value, it's more team spirit, it's reduced rework. The risks to struggle with uncertainties, with complexities, to overlook dependencies, this is something which we also see in Agile, and obviously complexity can kill any of these paradigms. So we can already draw here a very brief conclusion, which is risks are rather similar. Value from plan-driven is that you have this focus on a stable, a predictable and understandable framework which supports many different stakeholders in even different companies over a long lifetime. Agile, which has this highly flexible approach, specifically with respect to project management and implementation. Lean development, which takes the